My name is Gabriela Baczyńska. Hello, we are starting this panel. I represent the European Investment Bank here at this discussion. And we have three panelists with us today, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to my left, Mariusz Jan Radło, PhD and professor at the Warsaw School of Economics, Poland's top business school. You have fans here. Mr. Radło is the head of Department of Global Economic Interdependence. He is also the coordinator of the scientific cooperation between the Warsaw School of Economics and the European Investment Bank, which has borne fruit this year. The European Investment Bank has had its contribution to the Warsaw University report. Next to him is Mr. Andrzej Jackiewicz, who has just changed hats in his life after 3 decades working in the international corporate environment, including Procter & Gamble, among others. You have switched to a new role, a private investor, non-executive director, and also strategic advisor focused specifically on new technologies. So that is relevant, very relevant to our discussion. And Matteo Ferrazzi, senior economist at the EIB. MBA expert. He's an expert in country risk, including in Central and Eastern Europe, where you also specialized in your previous role in UniCredit, right, in Vienna. And Matteo teaches at the Catholic University in Milan. So we will have an interest. He's the author of the EIB contribution to this year's report presented at the forum. So we're going to have different perspective from a financial institution, academic perspective, and a perspective of private businessmen on what are the key competitiveness and investment challenges and opportunities in Central and Eastern Europe. So Professor, maybe let's start with you. What are the key challenges you see to promoting innovation in our region, to boosting competitiveness? And what about this famous middle income trap? Are we there yet? And what to do about it next?
I'll start with the middle income trap. We've started discussions about middle income trap and the threat of falling into this trap here in Central and Eastern Europe. These discussions started about 10 years ago because we observed that some countries are growing, the GDP is growing, but at a certain level, these countries have a problem with further growth and achieving a high incomes level. And there were many investigations about factors influencing this inability to grow faster at higher level. And there were some factors related to institutional problems, over regulation of some economies, with diversification of industries in many economies, and ability to develop new industries, more innovative industries, these industries which are based on technologies. So this is another element. There are also some structural problems in some economies related to demography, to ability to finance investments. So there are many problems related to that may make you vulnerable to falling into the middle income trap, but there are also some remedies. And growth based on technologies, innovations, is one of key features of economies that are not vulnerable to fall into the middle income trap. If you are able to develop new technologies, to utilize those technologies, develop, I would say, monopolistic advantages that make you to be able to move up value added, to increase value added and move up value chains, then you are less vulnerable. You may increase your GDP per capita to a very high levels. So this is my comment at this stage.
Okay, so we're going to get back to you about some differences in the region, especially on the thing you're mentioning about different institutional barriers, but specifically on innovations. Matteo, what does your input, your contribution to this year's economic report presented here in Karpacz has been based on the European Bank Investment Survey. It's a pretty unique survey. It covers 12,500 companies across all EU countries and a comparative sample in the US. So what's the picture that came out of this survey, specifically when we talk about innovation?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question and the invitation. So our starting point was the general broader competitiveness of European economies. And actually, you know, next week we will see the famous Draghi report on EU competitiveness. So we started to have a look at Central Eastern Europe, how it is behaving in the broader European picture, so the East-West divide. And actually, the situation is pretty good in terms of a lot of improvements that we have seen in the region in the last decade, but also we identified some gaps. So the situation is the following. The general paradigm of trade openness and low energy prices, strong relationship with Russia, strong geopolitical, let's say, relationship with other countries is over. So there is a change of paradigm. Draghi is even saying in one of his speeches there is a need for radical change in Europe because the previous paradigm is over, and this is affecting very much Central and Eastern Europe. In this sense, we see a lot of improvements, but there are big things to face. For instance, just an example, so patenting. Patenting, we see that Germany is able to have patents 15 times more than the entire region, the entire Central and Eastern Europe. If we take the top 2,500 research and development investors in the region, in the world, only 8 are coming from the region, out of which 5 are for Poland. So there are big gaps, and the Central Eastern Europe should upgrade the model, should move on without too much defending the industries of the past, but looking at the future. So I like very much to have the dog here. You have seen maybe in the corridor. So to go a little bit towards the new things that the future will bring us.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jackiewicz, what's your take on this? You're coming from a very different angle, a private businessman and big sort of international corporate world. How do you see this challenge of innovation and investment in Central Eastern Europe?
Can you hear me all right? So good afternoon, and thanks for having me in the panel. Thanks for the question. I'm very happy with what you said, Matteo, that we need a change, and maybe even a drastic change, because let me just start with a little bit of like a meta level, if you don't mind. And I think it's been already said today and yesterday, basically numerous times at various panels, whether we in Europe is actually placed in the right position to win a bigger global game. And I think if you look at the basically competitiveness, for example, if you look at a couple of KPIs or measures like capital investment, R&D, research and development, and productivity, actually we're falling behind massively. And we've been falling behind massively over not last couple of years, but maybe even 2-3 decades to US, China, and more recently India. Obviously, there are different business models, different cultures, and then all the different heritage. But I think the fact is that we as Europe, or especially European Europe, at a global stage, we are losing the game. And I think it's, from my perspective, as a previous corporate, but now more like a private business person, I think it's absolutely vital to focus on the environment protection, for example, and then just kind of, cutting off all the kind of inequalities and all that. This is super important, and especially for us Europeans. But at the same time, losing the game on productivity, for example, is not putting us into the right stage. And a couple of just data points. If you look at the global market share of technology, all technology included, obviously last couple of years, it's not only AI, it's obviously lots of other things like circular change and basically also the digital improvements and digital change in the world. In that perspective, Europe, and actually European Europe, used to be having 10 years ago 22% of the global market share in the total technology. Last year, it's 11%, so it's half of that. If you look at US, 10 years ago, that was, I think, 27%. Last year, 36%, and China and India obviously massively growing. So there is lots of more data, and obviously we can argue about methodology and lots of other things, whether it's somebody's having an interest, yes, no, in putting that data forward. But in my perspective, actually, we as Europe, or European Union, we are losing the game.
And on technology, it will be worse because of artificial intelligence. It's very clear that 70% of if you look at servers, cloud compounding, and so on, 70-75% is in the US. So it's going worse also for what you are saying is probably valid at least for the next 5 years.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. Maybe I just add one more thing. If you're looking at the AI investment, take last couple of years and obviously last 12, 18 months especially, we are investing in European Union at least 5 times, and this is the data for 2023, behind US, and obviously China is catching up. And if you continue with this dialogue, I think we need to go for a drastic change in my perspective.
Okay, so maybe one of the answers to straddling this seemingly, to some at least, binary choice between competitiveness and then green agenda is actually what Professor Radwo has mentioned, is innovation and new technologies. One of the things you said is that the investment barriers, regulatory barriers, are different in different countries of Central and Eastern Europe. And I know some of that also shows in your academic work. So maybe you would like to tell us a bit more, maybe highlight some examples if you want to name and shame countries.
Okay, before naming and shaming and discussing barriers, I will have a comment about the competitiveness of the European Union. More than 20 years ago, in 2000, the European Union adopted so-called Lisbon strategy. The key goal was to be most competitive economy in the world. My PhD was about this strategy. It was 2003, and my key argument and thesis was that will be ineffective, and this goal will never be achieved.
So you're the Cassandra here.
Yeah. So, and the problem is, I think the problem is because after Lisbon strategies, there was so-called Europe 2020 strategy with more focus on innovation, and then we now have European Green Deal, which is new strategy, and all these strategies show us some paths how to develop European economy, but I think there are too few discussions about European single market, about basics, about the regulatory agenda, because what we are observing now is a growing wave of so-called green regulations, which may be a new source of problems in the future. So I think European single market is something that we have to care about, which is, I think, the most important element of our achievements here in Europe. I mean, and then we can think about more competition on the market, more innovations, because only competition creates this pressure for innovations. And now let me go back to these barriers, because barriers are also about problems. Because there is a European investment survey by European Investment Bank, and in this survey you investigate various types of barriers. And of course, in recent years we observed that there are three key sources of problems for investments of enterprises. We have a problem with uncertainty about the future, about the limited access to skilled workforce, and energy prices, which is a problem of last 2-3 years. And then we also have problems with over-regulation of labor markets and product markets. And then we have an access to... fortunately, the problems with infrastructures are much lower. In some Central and Eastern European countries, we still have problems with infrastructure, but it's not the most important problem. And now, the hierarchy of all barriers is the same in all Central and Eastern European countries, and this is similar to other European member states. But we have some countries with higher barriers for investments, and among others, this is Poland, but also Latvia, also Romania, Slovakia. So these countries have bigger problems with investment barriers for enterprises. On the other side, we have such countries like Estonia, Lithuania, Czech Republic, or Hungary, and in these countries, these barriers are much lower. And then when we compare enterprise investments with the level of enterprise investments with the level of these barriers, we may say that at least partially these barriers explain differences in the level of in the level of investment. So we have a diagnosis, and we have to solve the problems.
Okay, it's interesting. Thank you. There's a few things I want to pick up, but since you all mentioned green investment, Matteo, I know in the report that you prepared, there is a chapter, or part of it is dedicated to how companies in Central and Eastern Europe see the requirements of green regulatory agenda, versus Western companies. Is it more of a sort of threat or more of a chance? Of course, the position of the European Investment Bank is that this is only, this is a false binary choice. What we have to do is to combine these two together. I wonder how you see that, especially how our region compares to Western Europe, right? Where the green agenda and energy transition is a bit more advanced.
Right. So we ask different questions to different companies in all the countries. We ask about physical risk, and this is quite impressive how this is growing. So most of the companies, like 2/3, depending on the countries, they feel on their accounts that they're losing some money because of some climate event. It's too hot, they have a fire, they have a storm, something is broken because of that flood. So that's increasing a lot, and we see everywhere in Europe, rather similar, a little bit harsher in the south of Europe. Regarding what you are saying, the transition risk, so the energy part and so on, that's a big difference, Western Europe versus Eastern Europe. So in Western Europe, there are a lot of companies that see the transition as an opportunity. Maybe they are selling batteries, maybe they are investing in something climate friendly, maybe they are producing something that will be used for the future instead of carbon intensive technologies. And in Eastern Europe, there is more the concern on this. So I think we should work a lot on this side, especially via investments, but also knowledge, because there is a concern. So the companies in Central and Eastern Europe are signaling us that there is a concern on the green transition. Now the two things, competitiveness and green transition, are going in the same direction, because I always do this example. If we want, let's imagine an absurd scenario in which we want to keep, we are the best producer of diesel cars, we don't want electric. I mean, for sure, we will be late. We will not be competitive. That's clear, because China is moving, US is moving. Even countries that are in Middle East are having a lot of electric cars and so on. So you will fall behind for sure. So I think the two things are going together. You need to move in this direction. You will be more competitive. There is no other way out. The problem that many countries are not feeling, and they do not have a good feeling on that part, probably because they are in the wrong sectors, let's say, wrong in this sense.
And so maybe green innovative technologies is, even though the initial investment is heavy, is actually the tool that might help Europe and then Central and Eastern Europe regain their competitive advantages that we have lost / are losing on the global market. Mr. Jackiewicz, you were raising your hand. Something on green technologies spiked your interest.
Yeah, actually, it's probably a mix. As you said, I've been running businesses for rather many years, and then you have an obvious dimension of making a distinction between the strategy and operations. And I think at this very level of innovation and winning in Europe versus other markets globally, I think we need to sort out really the strategic issues. And then one of them, in my perspective, and I really believe that this is number one thing we need to be answering. It's obviously super complicated debate, is whether we want to continue if this kind of a welfare state a little bit in Europe with all our massively rich heritage that is super good and everybody wants to live in Europe, or we would like to be joining more like a competitiveness game, in my perspective. So I think hopefully politicians are going to be kind of up to that challenge, because until now we had some issues.
But so how do you see the tension between high quality growth, high ESG standards, high green investment standards, also social conditions in terms of labor, in terms of social inclusion? How do you square that circle together with cheap labor costs? Huh? This is something that has made Europe probably one of the best places to live on planet Earth. So how do we can't just throw it through the window, right? How do you balance?
No, I think you just mentioned at the end the word of balance. I think it's obviously super complicated and complex Let me just give you an example of AI Act. We know that actually it has just been implemented, actually August this year, and it's going to be kind of in force in 2 years, so August 26, like ESG kind of, right? And from my perspective, also as a business person, the key is that we're going to be doing all the good things to protect the rights of consumers that are violated in many cases today. But if it's going to be going too far, it's going to be actually causing the technology going away from Europe even further. So striking the balance, as you said, obviously we need to be talking probably for days on that, I think is absolutely critical, because I don't think we cannot lose our European heritage and kind of way of life. I think it's probably not what should happen and what couldn't happen. On the other hand, we need to be, as Americans are saying, kind of calling spade a spade and facing the reality, looking to the mirror. We're losing the game against US, economical game, productivity game, and all that, which we've been discussing right now, against US and now China and India and a couple of other big markets. And I think that's a fundamental question to be answered in my perspective. ACT is just one of them, and that can be super good if it's balanced, but it could be super bad if it's going to be causing technology kind of going away from Europe even further, because technology, and obviously not sure whether we're going to be asking the question about what can be the solution for Europe and Poland especially. It's obviously technology, but we cannot have the situation that this is actually going away from Europe. We need to stop it and reverse the trend.
So over-regulation, something Professor
I mean, we
has
are
already mentioned.
over-regulated, of course.
Let me stop you for a second. As a token of appreciation to all of you who are still here, despite the hour and the heat, if there is a question from the audience, we would love to take it now, or maybe think about it for a moment. Okay, so I have. There you go. If you can tell us your name, and then go ahead.
I'm Michael from Warsaw School of Economics. I would like to ask you, all of you, what could you and Poland do to make our market more competitive compared to China and America? You mentioned the over-regulation in EU, but are there any other issues and ways we can solve that? Thank you.
Super, thank you. And thanks a lot for daring. So again, I think that's a question about what other barriers to innovation and competitiveness you can think of. Thanks, Matteo, for helping with the mic.
I take the question as well. I do the full spectrum of... So no, thank you for the question. First of all, think of it in the broader European sense. It's not only Poland, because Poland is in the middle of many other trends that are very similar. So it's not anymore the story of the 90s, in which Poland had to attract foreign direct investments only, and the Germans, the Austrians, or Italians were coming to invest here. So it's a bit broader. So investments are key. So you know the difference between consumption and investments. Here we have a big need for investment. When there are big changes, green transition, digital transition, you need to invest a lot, including you as a student, for instance, in knowledge, in skills, ICT skills, IT skills. For instance, this is a good lesson for a young person in your case. Invest, study as much as you can. Knowledge and skills will be the key factor. And this is, for instance, one of the main drivers of the future. So with good people, good infrastructures, you normally attract investments, and I mean that's the story around the world. Very easy.
Yeah, I fully agree, but I would just add that there is a certain role in the institutions, like governments at the end of the day. So I think they should be fostering, for example, basically the fact that the Polish companies are not only going to be active in this country, but they're going to be going European and possibly even global. There is a certain role basically for the governments as well, just to kind of to have the legislation that is going to be supporting that. I think it's super, super important. And what is obviously happening at the moment is a fundamental issue that needs to be solved ASAP. That is obviously the energy prices. I think, Professor, you mentioned that. I think you cannot be competitive with such high energy prices we face in this country, over Europe, but especially Poland. It cannot go. So as I said on the strategy versus operations, if we cannot fix the high energy prices in the short term, I think it's going to be very difficult to become competitive.
Is he one of your students, by the way?
No.
Not yet, okay.
No.
Just checking.
He's saved. Okay, I'll start with a more optimistic perspective. First of all, we have to say that Central and Eastern European countries are an example of a success in the European Union, because these countries were growing very fast in recent years. They started with relatively low level of GDP per capita. Now they are at a much higher level. So the European economy is not so bad, because some countries are growing faster. Of course, there are many countries, especially I would say the southern European countries, which have a problem, which is of structural nature and systemic nature. But going back to the discussion about competitiveness of the European Union and problems, I think that the key problem of the European Union is the fact that it's very good as far as regulations are concerned. Because we have ESG, an example. ESG is implemented in Euro-American economy, in Asian economies, but only in one region. It's translated into regulations. It's European Union. And also European Union has this specificity to translate into regulations many other aspects. Not only ESG, but also these aspects related to green regulations. Sometimes it is fostering innovations, because some types of regulations foster innovation because of new or inability to do something and necessity to do other things. So we may innovate in some some areas, but I think we have to think about this. What was the key element of success story of Central and Eastern European countries? These countries were growing so fast because of the fact that they have an access to single European market. Many investments in these countries were done because of the fact that they are part of this market. Single market also means more competitive pressure, which is translated into innovations, because competition is key factors influencing companies to innovate. And sometimes too much regulations in some areas may, of course, create market for some industries, and there are countries in the European Union that love regulations because they create markets for their companies. Unfortunately, not our companies. And I think that preserving competition and single European market is a key element and key prescriptions how to defend competitiveness of the European Union.
Gabriel, also in the Draghi report, so this size and scalability is what we miss compared to US and China. So the Eastern European countries are a good example, bigger market, and then you get investments, more innovation, and your companies can sell the goods everywhere.
Because we only have a minute left, the last question belongs to the moderator. And because it's an esteemed panel as well as an entirely male panel, my question for you is this: what's the role of gender economy and women, or other genders if you wish, in discussion about competitiveness and innovation? So we're talking about one of the key investment barriers being lack of skilled labor force. And women make more or less half of the society, and of course their labor participation is far below males. So I wonder if, sort of government programs, maybe speaking of regulation, or maybe business approach, could be something that would lead to bigger participation of women in the labor market. Or maybe other ideas and examples that you have thinking about the gender sort of aspect of competitiveness and innovation. Go ahead, Matteo.
I was checking a little bit the data. So Central Eastern European countries are not doing so bad in this respect. So the worst in Europe are mainly Southern European countries. And you see also their economic performance is not so good. So Greece, Italy, sometimes Romania, especially if you look at the employment rate and so on. Central Eastern European countries are not bad at all. Germany, France are a little bit better in terms of female participation. So that's, as you were suggesting, is very important when you have a skill shortage. Very important. My message is that we need to work on the public sector, private sector and so on, but it's something also that is coming from the families. So we must be a little bit intrusive. Also with the regulation.
So more regulation. Interesting tension
because
here.
the-
Okay.
That's
Lesson
my
one.
personal experience, that it starts from the families. So some regulation that would favor, for instance, males taking some periods or oblige males to take some periods for the kids would be something that is necessary. Otherwise, we will never end up with putting some quotas that is not something fair as well.
Okay, Mr. Jackiewicz?
Time is up, just very shortly. Okay, so I think the dimension in that respect we need to be sorted out is basically going from more the user's perspective, kind of having women, girls, ladies as users, but more creators, drivers in the technology sector. I know it's a massive territory, obviously, to kind of cover up. I think that needs to be going more, and then basically just had some numbers, right? I think there is still some way to do.
Okay, Professor, because you're the host here, if somebody can go over time, it's you, so you still get a chance to answer this question.
Okay, so my answer will be very short. As you may imagine, I'm not a big fan of regulations, so I'm not a big fan of regulatory solutions for gender problems. But as far as my experience is concerned, in my department and in my project, I usually have a balance between various genders, but not because of the fact that I'm, ideologically interested in this balance. But I think that more diversified teams are more effective. We may discuss more issues, take a look at some problems from different perspectives. So I think this is the solution.
So you're saying not regulation, not top-down regulation, but best practices implemented on
I
the
think
ground.
that's-
Okay, super. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thanks for your kind comments. Thank you very much for the one person who dared to ask the question, and thank you very much for being here despite the heat.
Thank you.